Hey up everyone. Today I start part 2 of the best sounding bikes videos that we began before the Dakar took over. This one is for the 2-strokes, but as I said, I am having to split it up into several videos. It does come with a disclaimer too. On 2-strokes, the design of the expansion chambers is critical for performance, and well-designed exhausts will change the sound and performance of a bike entirely. Having said that, the bikes themselves do all have their own signature sound, and hopefully there will be some surprises for you. A quick welcome to the new subscribers from the Dakar too, and I hope you enjoy this video. I know it's very different, but everything still has 2 wheels and an engine. I do explore many aspects of the 2-wheel world, as you can see from the videos on the channel. It has been a fantastic journey, and despite YouTube doing its best to kill the channel after the copyright strike from MotoGP in December, we have survived and will continue to grow. This is without a shadow of doubt the best and most respectful motorcycle community on YouTube, and it's you that is to thank for that. You are BAREBONESMC as much as I am. Without you, the channel would be nothing, and as always, I thank you for that. Anyway, getting on with it. First today, we have an honorary mention, whose name often comes up. Walter Caden, the DKW and MZ companies, should always be remembered when it comes to 2-strokes. Walter Caden was the man who perfected the use of Helmholtz resonators to create what we now know as expansion chambers. He was also one of the leading lights in the drive to perfect the rotary disc valve induction system for fuel intake regulation. Without his work at DKW and MZ, many, if not all, of the following motorcycles would never have been anywhere near as good as they were. The order of any list can be subjective, and that's impossible to avoid here. So I'm not saying any one is better or worse. I have ordered it so that the more obvious choices you all know of all come first, and the less obvious ones I hope will surprise you follow at the end. They are all fantastic sounding bikes, and I hope you appreciate their lilting tones. And yes, I will follow it up with a raw sound video of highlights with no voiceover. First, we have 3 bikes that are intrinsically related. They mark the progression of the original bike, which has to be the best known 2-stroke race bike of all time. The motorcycle that redefined the world of race bikes was the inimitable Yamaha TZ750. The Yamaha TZ750 was a water-cooled across the frame 4 that took the racing world by storm. To all intents and purposes, this was 2 of the already successful TZ350 engines built into one block to make a 700cc inline 4-cylinder engine mounted in a newly designed high-tensile steel double cradle frame. A factory-spec TZ750 OW19 won its debut race at the 1974 Daytona 200, ridden by Giacomo Agostini, who went on to dominate the Japanese championships and the world racing scene as well. The Formula 750 World Championship was only run for 7 years, from 1973 to 1979. After it was introduced in 74, the TZ750 won every year afterwards. John Dodds took the first title in 1974, followed by fellow Aussie Jack Finley in 1975. Then came Victor Palomo, Steve Baker, Johnny Cecotto, and then finally Patrick Pons as the winner of the final championship in 1979. The list of racing giants still misses out one all-important rider in the history of the TZ750. That man was Kenny Roberts. One of his most famous wins was the Indy Mile on the TZ750 flat tracker, but his wins were many. The TZ750 marked the start of his rise to become one of the greatest motorcycle racers of all time. The initial bike produced around 90 horsepower at 10,000 RPM, and even with the 6-speed box, it was easy for even the best riders to get caught outside the power band, but get it right and the bike was unbeatable. It was just lighter and faster than any of the opposition. Not content to sit on their laurels, Yamaha were pushing R&D on their race bikes, and in 1976 we saw the next iteration of the TZ750, That bike was the Yamaha YZR750 OW31. The first of the YZR750s, the OW31 used a 7-port reed valve induction system, which pushed power up to over 115 horsepower straight from the factory, and in the hands of expert tuners, it would do much more. Displacement was increased to 748cc, and the chassis from the YZR500 OW23 was used. It continued to evolve until the end of the F750 World Championships in 1979, and in its final version, with 6 scavenging cylinders, achieved a maximum power of over 160 horsepower and a top speed of 186 miles an hour, or 300 kilometers an hour. After that, it does all get a bit complicated. Things were changing very fast at Yamaha. Somewhere, somebody had the bright idea of reversing the fuel airflow through the cylinders. From what I understand, it was initially more about creating space and a more compact design. However, somehow they figured out that running the 2 central cylinders normally with the carbs at the back and the exhaust at the front, but running the 2 outer cylinders to flow backwards gave them extra power too. Then, in 1980, the Yamaha YZR500 OW48R was born. It first raced at the Dutch TT, and the new engine layout produced around 10 horsepower more than the previous OW48 engine. The R in its designation stood for reverse, and the chassis used was initially an OW45 type steel frame. Kenny Roberts rode the machine to a 3rd place in the Belgian Grand Prix. A revised version was used in the final round at Nürburgring, an aluminium chassis used to replace the steel one, and it finished in 4th place. This was a hybrid prototype that resulted in the production of the OW53 in 1981. Research and development continued, and eventually we got the square and V4 engine Yamahas, but earlier across the frame 4s do just have a special place in my heart. I was lucky enough to see riders like Christian Saron and the great Jarno Saarinen push them to their limits and beyond, and they did change the world of racing, making it much more accessible for the masses. While Yamaha were dominant in the 750 class, the 500 class was much more of a challenge. Our next bike has an engine whose roots go back to 1963, when Suzuki first released their new RZ63 race bike. It had a square 4 disc valve engine that produced 52 horsepower at 12,500 RPM and was capable of 140 miles an hour. The RZ63 was fast but fragile and developed into the RZ64, RZ65 and on until Suzuki lost the thread for a while, focusing on the XR11, the racing relative of the GT750. They returned to the square 4 format in 1974. Barry Sheen was hired to help develop the new bike. The new XR14, which became known as the RG500 Grand Prix bike, featured a 114 horsepower disc valve square 4 engine with a top speed of 175 miles an hour. In an attempt to make the bike as narrow as possible, Suzuki tried a new tube frame with no front down tubes, but the handling was sketchy, and although the speed was undoubtable, it could only reach 5th place in the World Championship, and in 1974 saw no wins at all. 1974 saw an updated RG500, and better results came, with 4th and 6th in the individual championship and 3rd in the manufacturer's standings. Then, in 1976, a faster, lighter RG500 reached 183 miles an hour and won the world title, ridden by Barry Sheen. It was Suzuki's first manufacturer's title, and they would go on to win the individual title and manufacturer's titles again in 1977 with another updated version of the RG500. For 1978, Suzuki introduced a shortened version of the square engine by stepping the crankshaft. This was the birth of the engine design that continued on until the now legendary RG500 road bikes were built. But there was a changing of the guard. 1978 was possibly one of the most exciting 500cc World Championships ever. Names like Johnny Cicotto and Thibaut Lansabori lined up alongside Pat Hennon, Will Hartog, Steve Baker and the young Marco Lucinelli. They were also joined by the 1977 350cc World Championship, Takazumi Katayama. But two men stood above all the rest. And the real war would be between Barry Sheene on the Suzuki RG500 and Kenny Roberts on the YZR500 Yamaha. The season was hit with injuries and controversy, but it came down to the last race, and Roberts was the winner. It was Kenny Roberts' time to shine, and he took the title for 3 consecutive years. It wasn't until 1981 that Marco Lucinelli won the title back for Suzuki. But in the intervening years, every 500cc race became a race between these two dominant forces. The next bike is an example of the fact that sometimes you really can have too much of a good thing. Honda had stepped away from racing when the two-strokes had taken over, but in 1984, an all-new Honda NSR500 made its racing debut. The new engine was a true V4 with a single crankshaft making it more compact. It really was a screamer of an engine and just too powerful for the chassis. Year after year, we saw riders flying through the air after horrific high sides. Crashes dominated the championships, and it took a rider of exceptional skills to tame these, possibly the wildest motorcycles that had ever been handed to any racer. This was the era that prompted the 2 feature films called The Unridables, and if you haven't seen them, they really are worth watching. There are some incredible insights into what the riders were thinking as they took their life into their own hands race after race. Over the next 20 years, Honda won the 500cc championship 13 times. But it was in 1992 that the biggest change happened. The world saw the effect of what became known as the Big Bang NSR engine. The new engine had a different crankshaft placement, but the big difference was that the 4 cylinders fired simultaneously. In this way, although the drivetrain took on a heavy load with the 4 cylinders firing at once, there was a longer recovery period than with the traditional firing order. This meant that although the tyre suffered a higher load at the point of ignition, it got a longer recovery time between the power pulses. This decreased overall tyre wear significantly, which was huge at the time. The new engine had a unique sound and was dubbed the Big Bang, and the rest, shall we say, is history. Wayne Gardner immediately gelled with the new bike, but Mick Doohan was faster with the old engine. However, Doohan soon realised the advantage of the new engine, which meant tyre wear was reduced significantly. 3 riders were given the new engine: Gardner, Doohan, and a young amateur named Alex Creville. Gardner was injured testing at Suzuka and again at Mugello, so he couldn't race until the 7th race of the season in Hockenheim. Doohan won the first 4 races of the season. The Big Bang Honda was just better, and it even put novice Alex Creville on the podium in his 3rd 500cc World Championship race at Shah Alam. Alex Creville went on to stand on the top step for his first 500 Grand Prix win in just his 8th race. Honda had built an engine that tamed the wild handling NSR500, and it produced around 170 horsepower in the process. The other manufacturers could see the new engine was a winner, and as the story goes, the unnamed parties had microphones and an oscilloscope in the back of a van in the paddock, and by analysing the sound waves of the NSR500's engine, they discovered the secret. Suzuki was the first to respond with its own Big Bang engine at Hockenheim. Then Cagiva premiered theirs in the next race at Assen, and Yamaha a race later at the Hungaroring. By the end of the 1992 World Championship, All four manufacturers were using the Big Bang concept in their engines. Next today is a bike that never achieved the success of the bikes I've already mentioned, but it has a story all of its own, and it just so happens that there is someone much more qualified than me to talk about it. So I will let the legendary Corky Ballington tell you about the Kawasaki KR500.
Hi guys, hope you're going to enjoy the evening. I thought we'd share a bit of history with you, and a bit of a treat tonight. We'll fire up the old KR500. It's an 82 factory bike. There was only 5 ever made, so it's pretty rare. What we're going to do though is strip her naked so you can see the bits and pieces. So next step, we'll remove the young lady's clothing. Here we go. Gentlemen, feast your eyes. 82 model came out with a monocoque spine frame which took the petrol tank on top. So it had petrol holds fuel in the spine and in the tank, which was not a great idea. They because the weight went up. Having the year before, the monocoque just had a bigger monocoque frame that held enough petrol for a Grand Prix. Then this one came out with an extra tank, so that added weight to the already too heavy beast. But by and large, the engineering was magnificent. It was all beautifully made. Up front here they had a changeable head plate which you could adjust the head angle with, as well as the yokes were adjustable for to change the trail. Then the best of all of it that they did on this was put an eccentric front adjustable front axle. You could change the trail in a flash with that and really dial in what you wanted it to do in the corners. It had a mechanical anti-dive system. You can see the bits and pieces there. You could adjust for as little or as much anti-dive as you wanted, which really did help under braking. And it was better than the hydraulic anti-dive of the Yamahas and Suzukis, as they interfered with the fork, the damping. They kind of seized the forks up a little, whereas this allowed the forks to travel over bumps, yet stopped the chassis from diving. So it was I think it's pretty smart. Like all the two-strokes of the time, the 500 two-strokes, it's rotary valve square 4, which seemed to be the best setup in those days. The engine was magnificent. It was, I believe, it produced more horsepower than the Suzuki's, Hondas and Yamahas, but the bike was carrying 25 kilograms more than them, so it used to cook its brakes, and it was used to burn the back tyre out easily. So apart from that, it was just an engineering on it was magnificent. As you can see, all the welding and just the way it's all held together. Okay, I think we'll fire it up so you can listen to it. Ain't she a beauty? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's a little bit of nostalgia, and I must say it wants to go. The road's just not long enough here, and I don't think the neighbours will be too happy if I make any more noise. But let's hope you enjoyed that, and have a great evening, guys. Have a castle for me, and stay out of trouble, eh?
Hearing such a legend talk openly about such a special bike with no film crews around to spoil it is something very special indeed. Ballington was always a softly spoken character at the side of the likes of Sheen and Roberts, but on the racetrack it was a different story. He is one of the heroes who gets forgotten too easily, but he was a giant in the saddle, and rightly was awarded a place in the MotoGP Legends Hall of Fame in 2018. Next, we move forward in time again. The next motorcycle has the dubious honour of being the last two-stroke to ever achieve a pole place in the MotoGP World Championships. It was 1997. Kenny Roberts had had enough of Yamaha and the antics between him and Agostini. He decided to go it alone and build a bike of their own design from the ground up. It was built to take advantage of the lower minimum weight allowed for a three-cylinder bike. Roberts had Mike Sinclair, Warren Willing and Tom Walkinshaw as his team of engineers. They came up with a V3 design that was almost as small as the 250cc bikes of the day. It weighed just over 135 kilos and made around 160 horsepower. The first model was called the Modernist KR3, but it suffered from bad engine vibration problems, and a redesign was quickly done. The name was then changed to the Proton KRV3 because of the new team sponsors. The change of MotoGP formula in 2001 to 990cc 4-strokes with 500cc 2-strokes still allowed meant that 2-strokes were finished, and 2002 was the last year the KR3 was raced for the whole season. After taking pole position at Phillip Island in 2002, Jeremy McWilliams ended up finishing 10th in the race. The bike was then used as a backup machine to the new KR5 4-stroke. Despite input from Lotus and Formula One genius John Barnard, the 4-stroke engine for the KR5 was too slow early in the season, so McWilliams and Nobuatsu Aoki carried on using the 2-stroke KR3 for the first 4 races of 2003. It wouldn't retire gracefully, and it has to be one of the best sounding race bikes ever built. There is something special about the sound of that triple. Next, we go further back in time to 2 bikes that stunned the world when they were first released. I think most people think of the V4 motorcycle engine as a modern phenomenon, and will probably associate it most of all with Honda. But in 1965, it wasn't Honda, it was Yamaha who moved to a V4 engine format. First came the Yamaha RD05, a V4 250cc race bike built to take on the 6-cylinder Honda RC166 that had dominated the 250cc championships in 1964. The new RD05 had a 2-stroke V4 engine and replaced the previous RD56 twin. The new V4 engine used rotary disc valves and was effectively 2 sets of barrels from the already successful TT-winning 125cc air-cooled 2-cylinder RA97. The engines were stacked one on top of the other. Some may argue it wasn't a true V-twin as it had 2 separate crankshafts. However, the blocks were mounted in a V angle, so I will call it a V4 here. The Yamaha RD05 debuted as an air-cooled version in the 1965 Italian Grand Prix. However, for the next round it was outfitted with liquid cooling, and its only Grand Prix victory in 1966 would come in the Japan Grand Prix. Now think about that. Imagine redesigning, casting a new block and adding all the water pump and radiators in the time it took between 2 races. I know the races weren't every week, but that is some work to be done in such a short time scale. For 1967, it was completely redesigned as the RD05A, with every possible effort made to reduce weight and size. Although the RD05A fell short of winning the title that year, it did return to win both the manufacturers' and riders' titles in 1968. The next bike arrived in 1966, a year after the RD05. we got the smaller 125cc Yamaha RA31. This unbelievable 125cc V4 machine went on to win 2 consecutive world titles. The RA31 used a rotary disc valve intake, a forced lubrication system with an internal oil pump, and a featherbed type double cradle frame. In the opening round of the 67 season, it scored a debut win and went on to collect 10 wins during the season, ridden by the fabled Bill Ivy. He won both the rider's title and the manufacturer's title for Yamaha. In 1968, the RA31A was released, and it was even smaller and lighter. That year, it was Phil Reed who took it on to win the second rider's title. Finally, today, we have a very unique motorcycle that some of you may never even have heard of. It was a water-cooled flat-4 boxer engine motorcycle with an engine mounted in line rather than across the frame like the BMW Boxer Twins are. Mounting longitudinally got rid of many of the flaws of the BMW Boxer engine, and this bike was a revelation, and it came from a boat engine. The key component was an incredible engineer who was given the freedom to run with his idea. That man was Kim Newcomb. The bike was the Konig. It had no other designation. There was only ever one Konig engine for motorcycles. I first came across the Konig in sidecar racing, where the great Rolf Stenhausen took the Konig powered outfit on to win 2 world championships. Dieter Konig was the owner and designer of a company that made high-performance 2-stroke marine engines. They'd been successfully used in hydroplane racing, but Newcomb, a New Zealander, was a biker, and along with Aussie John Dodds and a German rider named Wolf Braun, saw the engine's potential for use in racing motorcycles. Initially, they mated up the Konig engine to a Norton gearbox and put it in a modified BSA chassis. This was in 1967, and at that point the engine, which believe it or not had been designed back in 1957, had already had 10 years of research and development thrown at it. A master engineer, Newcomb managed to screw even more power out of the engine, and in 1972 he took the bike into the World Championship arena. He finished 3rd in the championship in the bike's first year, which pushed Konig to enter again in 73. That was the year Newcomb really began to shine. No one had a faster bike than the MV Agusta at the time. The Honda won at times by having better handling, but the speed of the MV made it untouchable. That was until the Konig came along. Newcomb was building, developing and maintaining the bikes alone, often in the back of a van. There was no real factory team around him, but the results speak for themselves. In 1973, Newcomb led the World Championship from MV Agusta for the first 6 rounds, until a bad result at the Dutch Grand Prix. But the bike was fast, faster than the MV Agusta that had dominated the 500cc championships for so long. Unfortunately, this is a story with a very sad ending. On the 11th of August 1973, Newcomb was seriously injured at a non-championship event at Silverstone. The day before the race, Newcomb had a habit of doing a walk around the circuit to familiarise himself with the track. He noticed a dip in the surface, right before a sharp turn, facing a wall of wooden beams at Stowe Corner, and concerned for rider safety, approached Vernon Cooper, who was clerk of the course at the time. He simply asked for hay bales to be put in front of the wall of wooden beams, but Cooper just went off in a rage, threatening Newcomb with expulsion from the series if he had the cheek to complain again. The next day, Kim Newcomb led the race from the start, but on lap 6, he hit the dip at Stowe and ran wide, off the track, hitting the wall of beams he had drawn attention to the day before. He was treated on site but was unconscious and was rushed to hospital. Later that day, Cooper had the cheek to announce that maybe they should have put some bales in front of the wall at Stowe after all. Kim Newcomb never heard any apologies. He never regained consciousness. He was declared brain dead on the 14th of August and taken off life support. He was 29 years old, on the verge of greatness with a world title in sight. He was posthumously awarded second place in the 1973 500cc Grand Prix World Championships behind Phil Reed. But even in death, he had beaten Agostini and the MV Agusta. If you were interested, then there is a full-length award-winning 2006 documentary called Love, Speed and Loss that tells the full story. Without Newcomb to drive the development, the Konig sadly faded from history. One of those shining lights that shone so bright it burnt itself out far too quickly. This is a story that deserved a much happier ending, and both Newcomb and the Konig were sad losses to the world of motorcycle racing. On that sad note, I will end today, but let's take a moment to think about all of the fallen heroes we've lost. Kim Newcomb was just one, and unfortunately there are many. I have been thinking of doing a tribute video about some of the heroes we have lost, from Marco Simoncelli and John O'Sarano to Mac Hobson, Bill Ivey, the Dunlops and Phil Aslam, to name just a few. They should all be remembered. If you would like me to do a tribute video, let me know in the comments below. I will be following this with the best sounding two-stroke dirt bikes and road bikes at some point, but it does all take time, as you know. Quality really comes quickly. Thanks for watching, and thanks again for all the donations. They will be put to good use, and I will leave the donations link in the description for future videos. Please don't use the YouTube giving button, as they take most of it. I get almost nothing of what you give. All donations are much appreciated though, and it does help keep the channel free from sponsored posts, which are the bane of my life. If you haven't already, take a look around the channel. You'll find some great videos from every corner of the world of motorcycles, and YouTube has pulled most of them from the rankings, so they need some love. Why not take a look at the website too? As well as the t-shirts, there are many articles about all sorts, from maintenance tricks to ride-outs, track days and other adventures. There are many other printed products on the Redbubble page too. That's where I proof the new designs. They make great presents, and I try and put promo codes in the community page for discounts when I can. So it's always worth checking in case there's a big discount on. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you got this far. We really do have the best motorcycle community on YouTube, and I do thank you all for that. Remember, keep your spanners close and your keys even closer. Ride free, everyone!